How are you guys doing? Were you guys all here yesterday? Okay. I was here in the afternoon because in the morning I was getting ready for this. So this is the proper care and feeding of your front-end developer. I am Marlene Williams. What I'm going to do, my plan of action, is to go over what various team members in a development team can do to make the front-end process a little easier. But because we live in a, pull yourselves up by your bootstraps kind of society, I'm also going to focus on front-end developers and say this is what we can do also to make our own lives a little easier. And then at the end, I'm going to ask if any of you guys have ideas based on your own role, like problems you've run into with regard to front-end development and maybe solutions too, because I want to hear your feedback on that. My goal is to give concrete ideas to make working in a team more efficient and productive. So, a little bit about me. My name is Marlene Williams, as I said. My first website was with Drupal 5, so many moons ago. I was tinkering around. Somebody wanted me to build a website. I didn't know at the time that you could get paid to do that, so I think my first site was for free. But then I'm like, this is a lot of work. I should charge for it, and then they actually paid me. So here I am. I've been doing Drupal 6, Drupal 7, now Drupal 8. But I come from an art background, so I started off with site building, and then I kind of moved a little bit toward front-end theming. I really like colors. I like line and shape. One of the things I love doing too is making a site usable. So I'll go through, sometimes to my teammates' chagrin, I'll go through and start poking at all the things that are going wrong with it, and like, we could move this over here and it would be so much better. And they're like, oh, that's a lot of work to do, but I enjoy doing that. I enjoy making an experience for a user and pleasant for them, and so they can get what they want out of the experience. So in addition to enjoying color and line and beauty, I also get to play with code, and so I've got this right brain, left brain sort of marriage going on, which is like, I didn't even know growing up this was a thing I could do, is be both logical and creative. So that's why I really enjoy doing front-end work. Although it can be frustrating sometimes in code, because while you can like change a few lines here and suddenly everything changes on the screen, it also can suck you in for days when a little line of code is making the whole thing not work and you don't know why. I'm sure none of you can relate to that at all. A little bit more about me. I grew up and currently live in Portland, so I'm one of the few natives that actually lives here. How many of you guys are from Portland? Anybody? Okay, yeah. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. Please drive nicely. I haven't had a full-time job since my early 20s. I've been doing this as freelance. That's been my full-time job for the last 7 years. And then before that I was part-time, so I would work part-time and then do this part-time, and then finally I took the leap, and here I am. I've had many clients throughout the years, individual clients. A few different commerce shops, so I'll take a site from design to implementation. So I've done that spectrum. But what I enjoy doing is I enjoy working on a team, because then I can focus in on my specific skill set and get to rely on other people to solve problems that I'm not as good at, like, why is this white screen of death here? Or can you please tell the client that this is really not in the realm of reality? And the project manager can take care of that part. Which I value. So I value other team members very much for what they can add to a project. But I want to ask a little bit about you guys here. Who here is a front-end developer who has done front-end work? Okay, good. Who here is a back-end developer who has done back-end work? Okay, good. And there's some crossover there. That's good. Project managers? Any project managers? Great. Lisa, you can just you're all of them. Designer? Yeah, Lisa, I know you did. Okay, good. Okay. So a lot of you know what these different roles entail already. But part of why I've told you so much about myself is that every human is a unique story that comes into any team, any situation with who knows what sort of background. And so getting to know somebody can be helpful in working with them. Assumptions. This is assumptions for the talk. We're working on a Drupal site, so I'm not talking about front-end developers that are doing Angular or React and that's using a basic Drupal theme. A lot of there's crossover for sure, but that's going to be my scope right now. Also, we all speak English. There's no other major barriers to communication going on here. So I'm assuming we're all kind of from the same culture, because that's a whole nother level, which is good to talk about, but not something I can really cover right here. Also, I'm assuming that there's this sort of division of labor. Client should be at the top, but they're the ones who want the website. They're a very, very important role. They pay the bills. There's the project manager who, in my experience, will often be the one communicating with the client. I've started refusing to work on projects without a project manager. They are like the central nervous system. They make sure we get from point A to point B and all people communicate. It's crucial. I love project managers. Designer, that's another very common role, somebody who comes along. There can be a suite of designers like UX and then visual and all of that, but I'm just going to lump everybody in. Usually there's one designer saying, hey, this is how the page is going to work. And there's the backend developer who does the heavy lifting. Again, sometimes there's a team, but I'm just going to refer to them as one. Right now, they construct the site building, sometimes custom development. That's backend. Frontend basically marries the design to the functionality. So sometimes you fill in the gaps with a design. I don't know if any of you guys have done that, received like a one-page design, and you're like, okay, I need to extrapolate how this form might look, even though it's not in the designs. Have any of you guys done that before? Okay. There's some creativity involved there. Then there's usually QA, which sometimes the project manager is just a QA person, and the client can do that too, but that's a distinct part of the process. And then sysadmin. I mean, you can't really have a website without a server and things running. A lot of times the backend developer will take on that role, but it's still a unique skill set. I'm just going to focus on the talk for these bolded ones, because as a front-end developer, that's usually who I'm working with the most. Sometimes, especially nowadays, sysadmin is important for front-end builds and all of that, but we'll just lump them in right now with the backend developer. All right, so this is going to be kind of the meat of my talk, because the backend developer is usually the one, apart from the project manager, who I'm communicating with the most. Because we're both in the trenches, we're building the thing. If we're not communicating well, it gets really painful really quickly. So I'm going to focus on what backend dev can do, and also along the way what I can do to communicate well with the backend dev. The first thing is provide me with well-structured markup. If there are no template files or defaults for what's going on, like Drupal provides a lot of defaults, but sometimes when a designer comes up with a really great design, Drupal doesn't do that. So a lot of times there's custom work. So what helps me is when a developer comes to me and says, okay, here's the design, I've taken a look, and I kind of know what the requirements are and everything, and I'm looking at what Drupal provides out of the box, and it probably is not going to do this very well. So what helps me is when the developer says, hey, can you give me some structure here, like a markup sketch, I guess you could call it. And then that way I can go in and say, yes, I actually need, this H2 not to be at the bottom, but to be up at the top, and I need it to be this, and I need this div over here. Now when that happens, I as a front-end dev need to be careful not to go too detailed, because this is a sketch. There was one time a couple months ago where this happened, and I was looking at a ticket, and I kind of raised the flag, like, okay, it looks like I might need to provide the backend dev with some markup, and I ran it by the PM, because you don't want to be spending time on something without them being in the loop. And he is like, I don't know, I don't want you doing that, because in the past he's had a front-end dev go just like spend hours on like a little, markup sketch, and then the ticket ran out of time and went over, and so he put on the brakes. Well, same week I was working with a different team, and the back-end dev pings me in Slack and says, hey, I'm starting to work on this. It looks like the markup might need some custom stuff. Can you just give me a little quick thing? I gave him I looked at the design, sketch it out, like, okay, box, this is going to need to be a div, give it a proper name, here. So he goes, he puts it together, he hands it back to me, and when I get it, it's like ready to go. I can just slap the CSS on, and it goes right back. So it was a super efficient back and forth. With the project where I wasn't allowed to do that, we actually ended up having to go back and forth several times, where I was like, okay, well, actually that doesn't really work physically. I can't do that. And so he had to go back, and we ended up going over. So that initial communication of this is what I need is helpful, but also keeping it simple and not going crazy with all the details, because you don't need to do details at that point. Yes?
You lost me a little bit on the goals. So you're saying that the backend dev is providing markup to the front-end developer, or vice versa? And are you talking about wireframes, or are you talking about actual DOM elements?
DOM elements. Although when I'm figuring out what I need in terms of markup, whether I'm building it myself or asking for it, when I look at a design, I switch into I turn, basically in my mind, I turn the design into a wireframe, and I think about, this is a box, this is a box, this is how it needs to lay out. As for developer, it depends. It depends on how much access I have to the template. Sometimes if there's a custom module, I'll be getting code that the custom module is spitting out. So that's more what I'm talking about. If it's just theme stuff like template files, that's in my purview. Yes. Sure. I appreciate, yes. And ask me questions if anything is a little confusing, because it makes sense in my head, but it might not make any sense in your head. Okay. Also, along these lines, tell me if the markup I'm asking for is going to make your life miserable. I don't want us going into the red. So if, this span here, having this class is going to make you spend 5 hours trying to get into the depths of Drupal to change that, or like forms. I know how Drupal forms are. So tell me, like, this whole communication thing, if you're like, no, it's not going to work. Like, I can often come up with a solution to get around it. I have ideals about how I want the markup to be, and that's what I'm going to give you. But please let me know if it's going to be a nightmare. Along the lines of what I can touch, tell me what I can tinker with. So if there's a module and there's code in there and it's creating markup, and if I can see it, like I've gone, done a string search, and I'm like, okay, that's the class I really need to change. But if you're like, don't touch that module of mine, I've worked really hard on it, and if you touch it, it's going to break, let me know. And I'll be like, okay, you make the change. Otherwise, I would like to be able to have full control. So basically, tell me what area of the code is okay for me to mess with. And now I know version control can fix many things, but it's better to not make a mess to start off with. Sometimes when I'm, as a freelancer, I'll be joining a project halfway through, because somebody realizes they needed it done yesterday, and so I get called in. So sometimes when I join, I don't really know what's going on, and I don't know who's done what and what's been done already, and if I need to not be messing with a certain area. So if I join and you say, you can mess with whatever you want, that's freeing for me. Or if just please focus on this, that's also helpful for me, because then I can be like, okay, I know what I need to do. Let's see here. Add unique classes to elements. This goes back to when the developer's creating custom markup. A lot of times what will happen is I'll go through and there's a block that's getting spit out, and it's like an H2, no class, with a span, no class, and then an anchor, and then like a random anchor out here with no class that isn't in a wrapper. So I've got two unclassed wrappers, unlabeled or links in the same block, and I'm going to need to figure out how to target each one because each one needs to look slightly different. This gets more into preference because you can do that, but it's so much cleaner if I have like, this is the title link, this is the CTA link. And this can vary by front-end dev on what their preferences are, what sort of naming system they're using. So again, this goes back to communicating about what needs to be in the markup. But if you put a class in, you're paving the way for it to be changed later if necessary. So don't have just a plain old element there. Make sure things have labels on it that make sense. And then the dev can go in and target with CSS, and it's a lot cleaner. Makes the front-end dev a lot happier. So I switched around the order of those two. Provide access to databases and files. When I'm joining a project, sometimes this can be a project manager thing, but a lot of the time the dev is in there making changes. Sometimes you can export the config to database, sometimes not. Sometimes there's content that needs to be in there. So when a developer or backend developer is making something, sometimes they'll put in test content so they can make sure it works. What helps me is if I have up-to-date databases and files, and so I'm in sync with the backend dev. And that's on me to make sure I have that, but it's super helpful. Like my favorite backend devs, when they're working on a ticket and they finish up with their part of it, sometimes what they'll do is they'll attach the database to the ticket or make sure that I have it and then hand it over. And they're like, here you go. So I have a complete set of what I need to make what they just made look good. That's one of the, it almost went into the above and beyond, but I found it very helpful to have that. Okay, so this is the actual above and beyond stuff. You want to make my life great, help me with the back-end hurdles. So especially during setup, different teams have different ways of doing development, different workflows. If you can say, here's how you do this, if I run into a PHP error that doesn't make sense, if you can be around to help me answer that. Because a lot of times the setup is more back-end related, and if there's a custom module that needs to make sure it gets plugged in right, or anything like that. What Solar, like sometimes there have been HT access things where it's like it can't access a certain thing because there's a custom thing because the client needs this part secret, but I actually need to access it anyway. Helping me with those sort of things is great. Plain as a sounding board. Rubber ducking. Have anybody heard that term? Okay. Rubber ducking, for those who don't know, it's basically where you set like a little rubber duck or a toy or something. You just talk aloud to it, talk through your problems, and it's verbal processing. But with some of my favorite backend devs, we'll do that to each other. I was working on a project recently where he was trying to figure out overlays, modal overlays, and so he was just talking to me in Slack about it, and I didn't understand about half of what he was saying, which that's okay. But I was able to at least ask kind of intelligent questions, which helped guided him. And he's like, oh, okay, this is the way it could work. It helps me to do that to backend dev too, especially since I don't come from a CS background, computer sciences background. I'm always looking for ways to improve how I structure my code, how I think about code, and so being able to say, hey, this is kind of what I'm thinking about how to solve this problem. Obviously, I don't want to take up their time uselessly, but it can be helpful to have that sort of conversational back and forth. Kitchen sinks. Kitchen sinks, do you guys know what those are? Not like in your actual kitchen, but there's the style guide, which is like all the elements, and then the kitchen sink is where you start throwing in all the CTAs, all the different blocks, all the different possible ways that content could be presented. Sometimes you can fit that all on one page, like if you're using paragraphs, you can have a whole bunch of paragraph types all on one page. Sometimes developers will do this for themselves as they're creating these things, so they'll have that anyway, which again is where the database sharing is helpful, because if they've already gone through and created all this stuff, then I don't have to spend the time to do it. But if they can hand something off to me with the whole kitchen sink of all the things that I need to style, that's helpful. This also ties into project manager too, because sometimes the project manager or QA can do that and make something that I can just go one page, make sure everything looks right, or a couple of pages, make sure that all looks right. Wielding body classes like a boss. Now, this is more my domain to make sure I have all the right body classes. Like, it's my responsibility to do that. But sometimes Drupal can get really tangled and messy when you're trying to find this particular key. So color schemes, for example, if you need to have the content of a field be the body class and have it transliterated and properly punctuated and all of that, that's a little easier because I can do that. But if there's some sort of esoteric custom module where there's a little piece of data that I need to have represented in the body class, if you know how to do that, then I can go in, because you've already done all the work to like figure out how that works. And if I have to try to find it, that takes me 2 hours to dig down in there, where you've already spent the 2 hours to do that, and you could just, oh, here you go, and then you drop it in. So again, above and beyond, but that's made my life so much easier to have that. Any questions so far? Comments? All right. Project manager. Let's switch over to that. Bring the front-end dev in early, please. The back-end dev too. Both developers, if you could bring them into the process earlier, they can raise flags, say, hey, this I think might take more work. Then you can early on in the process communicate with the client about effort level versus reward. Because if they want this certain flashy thing and it's going to take 20 hours of back end and 20 more hours of front end, it's good to know that going into the project. That's fairly self-explanatory. Another thing is to lay out scope and timeline for me. Especially as a freelancer, I am juggling several different projects at once, and so I want to know how to pace myself. And even in a full-time gig, you want to know how to pace your time, how to pace your tickets, how you're thinking about it. So if I know, like, okay, we have this landmark, this landmark, this landmark, and we've got this much budget here, this much budget here, this much budget here, I can be thinking, okay, I can skimp on the work over here, because there's ideals, but sometimes you have to make decisions. And then later I can focus more on this. And then here I have time to cover whatever I didn't get to cover. So if I have a bird's eye view of what's going on, again, it's good to bring the front end dev early so they can see how things are developing, what the client is prioritizing, so I know what to make really shiny and what can be kind of fuzzy. Because a lot of times, having worked so much with so many different teams and different clients, I know sometimes they don't know what they want right away, but if I'm in the process early and I can see what they value, I can kind of make educated guesses about what they're going to want and preemptively solve problems down the road. Encourage communication between the front-end dev and the back-end dev. Like, I'm all about communication, but sometimes the back-end dev doesn't. They're usually like great people, but they don't always, it doesn't occur to them to be talking to me. So if you encourage communication back and forth, set up a venue like Slack. Say, okay, you guys, here, talk to each other on Slack, or email, or the ticket. Whatever's good for you as the project manager. That won't get in your way, but will facilitate that. Kind of explicitly tell them to talk to each other. Same thing between the designer and the front end dev. A lot of times when I'm working on a project, the designer is also a freelancer, so they're not always on the Slack channel, the same Slack channel that I am. So if you can say, okay, here, you guys can talk here, or I can set up a meeting, or if you have questions, I can pass them on. Whatever it is that needs to happen to make sure if I'm coming across an element or a component that there's no design for and I would like to have some feedback, or if I run into a problem where I really can't get that thing to swoop down in a circle. Like, it's just not going to happen. Do you have an alternative in mind? Or can we work through that? That's good. So as a project manager, you can kind of bring people together. That is very helpful. And along those lines, create a clear structure for troubleshooting. Sometimes coming into a team, I will encounter a problem, and I'm not really sure who to talk to about this problem. Do I talk to the project manager and say, hey, I've run into this, or do I go right to the backend dev, or do I go to the designer? Or do I just try to solve it myself because everybody's busy and doesn't want to talk to me? Like, if you can say, if you run into this type of problem, talk to this person. If you have a billing question, talk to this person. You have this. If there's hurdles that I encountered, and there's a good way that you know of for me to solve this, let me know that. Because I want to work well with a team. I want to not waste time on a problem if I don't have to, if there's somebody else who can help me with that. All right. This is more project manager in terms of tickets. Differentiate in the ticket back-end goals from front-end goals. Sometimes it's easy just to say, here's the design, guys, make it look like this. But if you can put some thought into, this is how it needs to function. This is for the back-end developers, I think is helpful too. This is where the data needs to go, all of this. And then separately, these are the front-end goals. It needs to look like this. It needs to act like this. That helps me not get confused about, do I need to implement this, or does the back-end dev need to implement this? This reduces confusion. Sometimes different project managers have different ways of doing it. Sometimes this involves doing 2 separate tickets. Sometimes this has a child ticket for the front-end work. Sometimes this is just 2 sections. So it kind of depends on what's easy for your workflow, what you're used to. But just having those distinctions in there are very helpful. Details. All the details. Please, just even if you're repeating yourself from ticket to ticket, then I don't have to go up and look at the other ticket where you wrote it down. Copy paste. Like, if there's similar tickets, just copy paste it in. That way I've got one spot to get all of my resources, all the design mock-ups, screenshots, links to existing content. So that's actually a big thing. When I'm working with QA or the project manager, if we can have the same content that we're looking at, or same couple pieces of content, then we can be talking about the same things. And like, you see that word there and how it's in the, looks wrong, it's a lot easier to identify problems. And this goes back to kitchen sink stuff. So if there's a kitchen sink that we can all be looking at, the backend dev, the QA, myself, the designer, that makes it a lot easier. Organizing the details, you could just put it all in, a flat thing, but if you do, I don't know. Project managers are good organizers. Just carry on. Make it. I appreciate it. Encourage documentation. Now this is not required, but on some of the better teams and the more functional teams that I've noticed, the devs will say on the ticket what they've done or how they've solved the problem. So if you encourage that and say, yes, take 5 minutes to write down what you did and how you solved it. Don't stress about it taking 5 minutes. Like, just do that. That helps later if you need to go back and resolve that problem or rethink about that problem. Then you don't have the devs trying to be like, how did I do this? Because you can't remember everything. Prioritize the tickets. And this goes to timeline and scope. So if I've got 10 tickets that need to be done by the end of the week, if it looks like it might go over or under by 2 hours, it really helps me to know what's really important. I can get that done, get it out of the way, and then if we have slosh, we can figure that out. Helps me organize my day, helps you get what you want. Designers. Bring the front-end dev in early and show them your wireframes. As you're brainstorming and thinking about how it's going to work, run it by the front-end dev. And for us front-end devs, don't be too critical at first. This is a brainstorming thing. Things are messy. But if I can see what the designer is thinking in terms of how the page is going to lay out and why, so UX too, then again, I can have that in my mind for later on. If there's confusion, sometimes I can go, oh, I remember back there, this is what they were wanting, so I'm just going to go ahead and make it like that. And that can save time. And ask, show your wireframe sketch to the front-end dev and ask if it's crazy sauce. That's in my notes. Because sometimes it just doesn't work. That's not how the internet works. Show them the designs as well. Learn basic HTML and CSS. You don't have an architect that doesn't understand hammer and nails. Like, learn just how the physics of the internet work. Take an online class. Maybe even ask the front-end dev to give you a crash course. They could just tell you all sorts of fun things. Even just the fundamentals are fine. But if you know that, if you understand how the H's, the headings work, H2, H3, H3, that they're not just decorative, that they're actually structural, and they mean something, that's helpful. JavaScript, if you're feeling really ambitious, because then you can understand what's possible in terms of page interactions. And then this is a little bit above and beyond, but I think this is really helpful, is ask for explanations. When the front-end dev says, no, ask them why. Like, break this down for me. Tell me what is going on. So when I want this, tell me. And not in an argumentative sense, I want to understand how is this working? What this can do is this can sometimes help the front-end dev think through the problem, be like, oh, okay, maybe I could actually do that. Because sometimes developers are just like, no, too much work, no. So if you kind of walk through it, sometimes that can loosen things up if you really want an idea to go through. But you're also going to learn something. You're going to learn something about how the internet works, how the design implementation works, and you're building that connection there. Because you're showing you care about them not wanting to spend 5 hours on this. Front-end devs. We can make our own lives better too. When you're going into a ticket, document what you need to complete a task yourself on a piece of paper, on a notepad. Take a hard look at what's wanted. Hopefully your project manager has broken it out into what's needed for you. And then say, this is what I need. Okay, I need a fresh database to be able to do this. I need all the files. I need to have, more information from the designer, because this is a little fuzzy. I don't really know what's going on. Or I need to get this library, this third-party library. Or I need to make sure, I don't know, whatever you might need to complete that task. Or I need to have 5 hours. Document and write down what you need, and this could be helpful for checking things off too and keeping yourself organized. Determine early in a project who does what, so you know who to ask for resources. This is communication with the project manager. Sometimes, because they're the brains, they know who's doing what already. They're already dialed in. So figure out who, if you have a problem with your htaccess file, who exactly do you talk to about when that happens? Or, if you find this really weird PHP error in your logs, like who's going to handle that? That way you're not hunting around last minute for the person that you need to find. Be assertive too in asking for what you need. This is something that I've had to learn. I think possibly my gender has to do with it. I've had to learn how to be a little bit more forward in what I ask for. But do it, like, kindly, politely. Say, I need this to be able to do this. And mostly when you say, in order to do a good job for you, I need to have this, it's reasonable. Like, they'll work with you. But don't be afraid to do that. And the next two ones are not so much team dynamics as it is strategy, and this could also be a separate talk in and of itself. But when you're starting out with a theme, do the bird's eye thing. Look at the design and break it out into structures and components. Sometimes when I get a design, I'll take an actual piece of paper, an actual pencil, and I'll start turning it into a wireframe so I can break it down into the elements and the divs and the sections that I need. But I don't start with that. What I start with is the granular stuff, H2s, links, paragraph styles, and then work my way out. So that you have the base stuff down, and then you can just start building on top of it. And by starting with the granular stuff, that gives you an opportunity to talk with the designer if there's unclear parts, if there's inconsistencies in how they've done paragraph styles, or if there's inconsistencies in how they've done block quotes. You can, by starting with a granular, you can identify those problems early and create kind of a smooth slate, clean slate for you to start building on top of. So that's where the teamwork part of it comes in. If you can break it down and have kind of a plan of action for yourself, then you can identify problems that you need to communicate with whoever, because you've determined earlier who you're going to talk to about these problems. And this is something that is helpful if there's time, if you can, learn how and why a backend thing does its thing. Open up the module, look at how it's getting put together, look at where it's pulling its data from, look at how the dev has thought about it and how they've constructed it. This will help you with potentially that issue, but also down the road and thinking about how you're going to structure your own things. And you're going to be learning more about how that backend dev thinks about things, which makes communication easier. When you're building out your thing, think as long-term as you can and think about other people. Comment. Put comments in. I love comments. I love it when backend devs put comments. I should have put that in. Comment all the things. Some of my favorite, yes, Katrin's nodding. If you're commenting, this also helps anyone who takes over later, and it helps yourself out 3 months from now when you've completely forgotten everything you've done. This is why I made this more specific, because it would break this over here if I didn't add this extra selector. Otherwise you're like, why is this so messy? And you're like, well, because of this. And then you're not trying to fix something that shouldn't be fixed. Not that I've ever done that. A year from now, could you pick it up? So make things logical, make things as clean as possible. By communicating with the backend dev about the type of markup you need, you're also setting yourself up for success later because you're making it clean. And be willing to go out of your way to help others too. As Abraham Lincoln said, he has a right to criticize who has a heart to help. So basically, I can't be saying, hey, backend dev, you need to step up and give me all this if I'm not willing to also take time and give them what they need. Or the designer, if I'm not willing to explain to them why it doesn't work. I'm like, no, just stop asking that. Don't do that. Or the project manager, if I'm not willing to help them out with, whatever questions they have. Or the front-end devs. This is the Drupal community, so I don't think I need to emphasize that too much. I think everybody here in this room is pretty... If you're here at the summit, you're already kind of inclined in that direction. Okay, so now this is when you guys get to tell me things. After hearing all this and hearing me lecture to you about what you need to be and what you need to do, what can I do? Have you guys thought about this? What can I as a front-end dev do that I haven't covered to make back-end devs? Yeah, Lisa.
One of the things that I've always admired working with you, because you were one of my first mentors before when I emerged from designer to front-end developer, is design reviews and asking intelligent questions about the design I presented. And I think design reviews need to happen with the team before they get presented to the client for a number of reasons.
Yes.
And I don't work with teams anymore that if the dev doesn't have time to review the designs before they go to the client, then I don't want to work on that project because it ends up costing the client more and making them angry.
I totally agree. Okay, so because there's no microphone out there, I'll kind of paraphrase, which is Lisa said that she really, as a designer, she really values having design reviews and with the devs, so that they can look over the designs and say, this is this is great or this is going to be a real problem before they go to the client, because that ends up saving the client a lot of money. If they approve something that isn't doable, that's a bad plan. Did I?
Yeah.
Okay.
The final thing is there are only 2 shops in town that I've worked with that do this, but they'll call me up and they'll say we need you to budget for a design review before the site was live. And so I can go in and play with the site and see if it's true the original design that we've been presented to the client.
Nice. Okay, so paraphrase. Apparently there are only 2 shops in Portland that do this right. Web shops. Web design shops, yes. They like to budget in time for the designer before it goes live, for the designer to review the site. Actually, I've encountered this. It's good. To review the site and say, yes, this matches what I was thinking, or no, this needs to be tightened up, or this is, what are you guys doing over here, before it goes live. So it looks good and it's dialed in. So that's good. Yes, Lisa. No, that's good.
When I was coming up and I was merging, transition, because I became a designer. I'm still a designer.
You
I'm
are.
Everything. But
Lisa's
I
a great
did
designer.
Front end and back end because I needed to understand it to be a better designer.
Yes. So Lisa's a designer and she studied front end and back end to become a better designer.
One of the things that I've run into is when I ask questions, some people, their teams are so overwhelmed or so stressed out that they interpret questions as me questioning their ability to do their job.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
My question is trying to understand their process and how my idea can fit in their process.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
No, that totally makes sense.
And I think sometimes we, as developers, because I'm guilty of it, you are so obsessed with what's going on your plate that you forget to be present to the question.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're present to the question and you understand why they're asking it, it makes for a better working environment.
Yes. All right. Paraphrase for the audience in the microphone. Don't be sorry. I'm glad this is good. It's also good for me because I'm rehashing it. I have to remember it. So when Lisa asks questions as a designer to try to figure things out, or as a dev, and she's in a team, sometimes the team is so stressed and overwhelmed that they take questions as challenges or criticisms when she's just really trying to understand how things are going. So when somebody asks a question, don't take it personally, or she said it nicer, be present in the moment to try to understand why they're asking the question. That can help smooth things out and increase communication. Is that good? Yeah.
So on to piggyback on that, there's a corollary. If you are getting defensive about a question someone is asking, I have found, I shouldn't say you, I should say I.
That's good.
If somebody is questioning work I've done backward front end, often, and I find myself getting defensive, it's because I know they're on something that I probably did wrong. You know what I mean?
There's a little bit of guilt there.
That's something that in the back of my head I know I didn't spend enough time getting that component right, or that whatever.
So secretly you're agreeing with them and criticizing yourself, except for maybe they're not criticizing. It's just, yeah, okay, so to paraphrase, so sometimes when you're getting questioned, when I'm getting questioned, it's easy to get defensive because I know that I can maybe skipped over something. And so just to recognize that, I think, can be helpful, to not get angry at them for asking the question.
And I guess empathy.
Empathy.
If you're asking and somebody's getting defensive, remember you're on a subject they're touching about.
Yes, yeah,
So, yeah.
exactly. Have empathy for the people who are defensive. That's a good point, too. Yeah.
A little emotional intelligence always goes a long way.
Oh, my
No matter
goodness.
what side you're on.
Yes. That's another topic. And we need more of that for sure. Hurdles as a front end dev that you've encountered, particularly in terms of working with a team. I know Lisa kind of talked a little bit about that. You guys have anything that I missed? You're making a thoughtful face over there.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
I don't have any dog in this fight. This is my first time of coming across web development.
Yeah.
But one thing that you said during the talk is the fact that, people need to take our time and learn how the internet works.
Mm-hmm.
That's my question. How do I go about, trying to, because if you know what arena you're playing on,
Yeah.
Maybe it makes a difference as to how you plan your game.
Yes, totally. So the question is, how do you learn how the internet works? Coming to places like this is good, but for the building blocks, so I taught myself this when I first my first web building assignment was for a state representative down at the Salem Capitol. I was the intern and I was the youngest. I was the youngest. Automatically, I knew everything about computers, right? And as an intern, you get to do everything nobody else wants to do. So I got handed, here, update the website. And I my dad was a computer programmer, but I wasn't interested in that. I wanted to be an artist. And so Google was in its infancy at that time. So I had to do a lot of research, and it's a lot easier now. But there are websites that break down, this is how HTML works. There are online learning schools now, which would have been awesome for me to have. And then there's tinkering. Go in and make a static page, throw it up on, you could just do it on your computer, create an HTML file, This is actually really great for doing the whole process. Think about what you want to have on there. Think about how it's going to be structured in a like headings and paragraphs and all this, and then make it work. Yes, Lisa?
To glom onto that, meetups.
Meetups are great too. Yeah, because then you can ask questions.
And one more to that is, coming from a beginner myself that's working my way up and I'm hoping to get a certification, is Drupalize Me.
Drupalize Me.
Piece by piece, and no, I don't work for them. But you
I don't
can see it, you can watch it, you can put it on pause, you walk away, you have your life, you come back, there it is, step by step.
Yeah.
And you can speed it up times 3 if you're getting sick of them talking.
Yes. Yeah. And yeah.
Another easy, good one, Team Treehouse.
Team Treehouse. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, these learning places would have been so awesome. Like, I would have saved me so many hours. They'll step you through bit by bit. This is how it works. Meetups help you to, because if there's a video course, there's always somebody to ask about, like, how does it, there was a gap here. So meetups can help with that. Going and talking to people, because then you're around other people who are giving minded as well. And that's a lot easier than trying to interrupt a coworker during their heads down time. And then hands-on, build something, break it a lot, break it some more, fix it, eat some chocolate. Yeah. Yeah.
One of the challenges I have with my company is, because I'm in a QA role,
Yeah.
we're trying to do a better job in creating more accessible sites.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you have better conversations about, accessibility and how to build for that? Because we have a tendency to leave it till later.
Sure.
We want to talk about it earlier, but we don't necessarily have a good way to bring it up.
That's a very good question. Okay, so the question is, as a QA, how do you build in accessibility? And again, this is another talk, but that's fine. I'm really happy because I'm all about QA. Like, actually, or QA and accessibility. Sometimes I will personally set aside an hour and budget into my bid of, okay, we're going to make sure your menu is keyboard navigable. Like, this is going to happen. It's for your own good, trust me. You have to create a value for it. A really good way of doing that is making people use only the keyboard to navigate the site. Make them use some of these tools, and they'll be like, oh, this is awful. And then you could say, well, there's actually some simple things you can do to fix this. There's some low-hanging fruit. There's, alt tags. There's a skip to content link. There's, hide this section using, this attribute. So if you create a value for that where they've had to walk through having to use this, then they'll be thinking a little bit more about that. And then you can explain to them, these are some simple steps that we can take, that we can build into our dev process. Make sure the front-end dev knows to create these skip to content links or all of that. And maybe train your dev. Give them a couple of hours to, look through some accessibility stuff so they can be thinking about ahead of time in that bird's eye state. Okay, this is how I'm going to structure things so it works well. Yeah. Good.
But it starts even before design wireframes.
Yeah. And that's, again, if your front-end dev is clued into and values accessibility or some of these things, and then they're talking with the designer while the designer's brainstorming about how the wireframes work and how all that happens, then you're going to be building that in from the start, and it's not a surprise thing that you have to add on at the end and redo a whole bunch of stuff. Communication, guys. I mean, it's amazing what you can do with it. Any other questions or yeah?
So, I'm a project manager on kind of a small team.
Yeah.
Like 1.5 developers.
Yeah.
Still trying to wrap my mind around the boundaries of what Frontend is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Still familiar.
Totally.
And a lot of it is the changes in the job. I mean, it seems like, they're talking to me about front-end design patterns,
Mhm.
front-end design pattern frameworks. And
Right.
talking about doing more with headless, which
Mhm.
means that there's a lot of API-led stuff.
Yep.
So the front-end developers are actually really need to do some API
Yeah.
design, data modeling.
I think it's like,
Testing. I mean, just this gamut. I guess my question is, they're entering the kind of relevant complexity of a backend developer or even a full stack.
Definitely.
So, how best to help them focus on what's emerging?
right, yeah. How to stay up to speed?
Well,
Or
or just like, just ask you as a front developer, what do you think? What are the most important changes that you see, and how are you adapting to it?
that's a good question. Okay, so to recap, front end work has I specifically for this talk I limited it to theming, but as I alluded to before, front end can be a whole lot more now, and as technology changes and evolves, front end devs are starting to do sysadmin stuff. They're tinkering around with the server to get the front end builds going, or they're doing a whole lot of more API type stuff. So they're becoming more of like a backend dev, and so there's a whole lot of overlap and not a lot of clarity. And so what I understood the question to be is, how do you help the front end dev stay up to speed and focused? Is that
Well, yeah, or maybe just adaptable.
adaptable? Okay,
It seems like the mind can work a little bit between
right.
disciplines of the two targets.
Definitely. To keep up to speed, I would say come to things like this, come to meetups. We have a thriving tech culture here with lots of meetups. If you sit down with Chris Bloom, for example, you will walk away enlightened on many levels. So find key people who are really up to speed and who enjoy this, and then sit down and talk with them. So meetups. I subscribe to a couple of email lists that have curated articles that are like, these are the latest technologies. So there's a CSS one, there's a JavaScript one, and so they'll be talking about the latest technological movements, or not even technology, but just how front end thinks about things. And then so I can be aware, even if I'm not using it, I can be aware of it. Maybe also budget in time, if they're full-time employees, budget in time for them to play. Like, say, hey, take this new framework and see, does it, learn it, and then see, will it work for us? So that can be kind of a risk to be allotting that time because you're paying them. But it's something you kind of have to weigh. Like, how much do you want to educate them and invest in that, and invest in mistakes too, because sometimes you choose a framework and it doesn't work out. Yeah.
You don't necessarily have to do it on somebody else's time, on like paid time. I strongly encourage playing and breaking things. I've just recently traded a logo package to someone at this conference in exchange for, he's going to help me basically supervise me building something out in new technology that I haven't done before. And it's just a play project. I want to see what I can do with it.
So Lisa encourages breaking things.
I love breaking things. It's so much fun.
Not just anything though, like a project.
Yeah.
To clarify, just don't go around throwing things. That's it might be cathartic, but that's not really. All right, I am at time basically. So if there's like one more question, one more comment, otherwise I'm going to end. Yeah.
When are you going to stop freelancing?
I'll talk with you later. so far, it's good.
Also, do you have any bandwidth? Because I know.
Talk with you later about that. All right, thanks, guys.